Hi everyone. Today we are going to talk about dialogue. So I love dialogue. I love reading dialogue. I love writing dialogue. It just makes your story come alive. So what we're going to talk about today is making dialogue sound authentic and why that's important.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Monte channel. If you are just meeting me, I am Julia Monte. I am a women's fiction author, and I'm here to share some writing tips with you to help you write a better story and hopefully get it published if that's what your goal is. So let's talk today about writing authentic dialogue. When readers pick up your book and they open it up and they read dialogue, they want to be transported into that scene. They want to be able to hear your character, what that character sounds like, what that character is saying, what that character is feeling. And the best way to do that is by writing authentic sounding dialogue. To me, nothing is more disappointing than reading dialogue that just doesn't sound the way real people talk, where I'm reading it and all of a sudden I'm reminded that I'm reading and I'm not really there with the characters. Now, obviously we're not really there, but the whole illusion is that we are listening to these two people. We're a fly on the wall. We're actually the character, especially if we're in the I point of view. I want to hear what that character really says, what he really sounds like. Not, if I'm reading about a 13-year-old teenager, I want it to sound like a 13-year-old teenager, not the author writing the dialogue for the 13-year-old teenager, right? So let's take a look at what bad and good dialogue might sound like. So tell me what is wrong with this dialogue. I had a terrible day, Kelly said, sinking into the couch beside her husband and kicking off her shoes. He picked up the remote and turned off the baseball game. Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry. He stood. Let me pour you a glass of wine and you can tell me all about it. Thank you. It's my idiot boss. You know how clueless he is. He handed me a file as I was leaving to go home, expecting me to review the proposal tonight and offer feedback by morning. Paul handed her a glass of wine. He's really an insensitive jerk. I don't know how you put up with him. I don't either. I feel like he's taking advantage of me because I'm the only one who always gets things done. You know what I mean? Yeah, I feel that way too. Okay, so does this dialogue sound authentic? It could. Are you picturing a husband and a wife? I'm not. Okay. So there's something wrong with this conversation. It doesn't feel like one that usually a wife and a husband have. It feels more like, to me, that she is talking to like her best friend, right? Why? Because that's typically, like, if I think back to like what my parents spoke like, what my friends and their husbands speak like, what I speak like with my husband, it's usually not like that. Okay, so maybe it's just overly polite, maybe it's too touchy feely, maybe it's just kind of stilted. So there's something wrong with that dialogue. So I need to think about how to make it sound more like a husband and a wife, right? Two people who, first of all, the husband is sitting on the couch, he's watching something. He's not going to immediately jump up and start pouring her a glass of wine. It just doesn't sound realistic. Okay, so let's read this again. Let me rewrite this. I had a terrible day, Kelly said, sinking into the couch beside her husband and kicking off her shoes. Paul said, his eyes glued to the baseball game on the TV. Can you turn that off for a second? He picked up the remote and turned the sound off on the game, his gaze settling on her almost reluctantly. What happened? It's my idiot boss. You know how clueless he is. He handed me a file as I was leaving to go home, expecting me to review the proposal tonight and offer feedback by morning. Paul frowned. You should have told him no. I can't do that. Why not? That's why he takes advantage of you. You don't understand. You don't stand up for yourself. I need this job. Paul reached for the remote and turned the volume up again. Just quit, honey. You don't need that shit. Come sit by me. He reached for her feet and began to massage the arches. Okay, so this time, does it sound more authentic? Yes, I hope so. Why does it sound more authentic? Well, typically, and I don't want to stereotype, it's everybody, every relationship is different. But again, we want to make it sound as close to what two spouses would sound like speaking. Typically, husbands want to fix things, right? Like he tells her, just quit, or you don't stand up for yourself. You should have told him no. He's giving advice. He's telling her what to do, rather than being more sympathetic the way that a best friend would be. So the best friend is the one that's going to say, "Oh, that sucks. It's terrible that this has happened to you. Let's get a glass of wine. Let's talk about this." Most husbands are going to do that. Not that no husbands will do that, but most will not. Most are going to try to fix things. They're going to try to make the wife feel better. Just come sit by me. Forget about this. You should have said no, right? Those are more common, typical male responses to their wife. So, also just his reaction, right? He's right in the middle of a game, he's watching it, and she's like walks in from her job and starts complaining about her job. He's barely listening to her, he's just kind of listening to the TV thing, and she has to tell him, can you just turn that off for a second? He does. He's not being less sympathetic, he's not being less kind in the second version, but he's being more real, right? More real to what he's actually doing. All of a sudden somebody's coming in, they're complaining about something, he has to be told to turn off the TV, the volume, whatever. Immediately turns it back on, right? So what you want to do is think about how, what are people typically like? What have you witnessed? What have you seen? And try to mimic that. Now, why does it matter? Why does it matter if you choose version one or version two? Well, because it people, when they read, they're reading for that emotional connection, but they're also reading for believability. They want to think that that is really happening. And if you're pulling them out, if they're thinking, well, I have never seen, like my dad would never react that way, my brother would never react that way. If the reader is acting that way or not seeing that character act like himself, well, then it's going to cause a rift, right, between what the reader is expecting and what you're actually delivering. Now, if you've set that relationship up that way, if you have set it up from the beginning that they are almost like best friends, that they are very close, that they do sympathize with each other, then it'll be fine, right? It depends on how you set your characters up. That's going to require you to do some work beforehand to show that this is the relationship that these two people have with each other. Okay, so if that's the way you set it up, then the first version might be more believable. So remember that you want your character to stay in character and to behave the way that you have set it up, or the way that most people would behave in that way, and the dialogue should match. So let me give you more reasons on why it's important for you to have realistic, authentic dialogue. The first reason is that you want your dialogue to distinguish your characters from each other. So each person speaks differently. We have different speech patterns. We have a different vocabulary that we use depending on who we are, whether we're male, whether we're female, whether we're working class, whether we are a child, right? So it just depends on who you are. Your vocabulary, your speech patterns are going to be different. And so by making their dialogue different, your reader is going to be able to identify the character, connect better with the character, and immediately know who's speaking. Even if you don't have the dialogue tag, they will know who is the person speaking by the way that they say things. Also remember that not only do men and women typically speak differently, men tend to have shorter sentences than women. We tend to elaborate a little bit more, but also that men speak different when they're among men, and women speak different when they're with their friends, with other girlfriends, right? We just have a different vocabulary. We use different words. Sometimes we may be more, both sexes may be more vulgar in certain ways. If we're describing something with our own sex, with our own friends, we're going to speak differently than we are with each other. With husband and wife are speaking to each other. Obviously, when we're speaking to our kids, we're going to use different vocabulary. When we're speaking to our boss, we're going to use different words. Also, people from different countries or even different regions within your own country are going to have their own vocabulary, their own way, their distinct way of saying things and phrasing things. You've probably seen memes, right, on social media, even saying how the different ways that people in the United States will talk about soda. I might say soda, another person in a different part of the country might call it pop, other people might call it Coke, right? So people just refer to things differently depending on what region or what part of the country or what part of the world they live in. The second thing is that authentic dialogue helps us to better immerse ourselves into the world, helps the reader, right, to better immerse himself or herself into your world. I remember reading a story written by it was during the 1800s, and the author was describing, it was a little fishing village, and her descriptions were amazing. They were really good. It really kind of set the tone and the scene. But when the characters spoke, they even had that language of someone who lives in this little community, who is in that world, that fishing village world, and that's their job. So they spoke for the time period, and they also spoke for their job, the way that they would speak, and it was very authentic feeling. And I loved it because it made me feel like I was really there. Okay, the third reason why you want to have authentic dialogue that sounds realistic is because it helps us, it creates an emotional impact in the reader. When a reader speaks, you feel that emotion that that character is feeling. So if a character, for example, says, "You weren't going to tell me about the baby, were you?" Depending on how he says that, that could convey that the character is angry or the character is hurt, right? Because of the way he says that. And so that helps us feel what the character is feeling. And her response might be just to shake her head because she's too emotional to speak. So sometimes not having an emotion or not speaking, not having any dialogue also helps us to see that emotion. Another thing that it does is sometimes it increases the tension, right? So when somebody is waiting to see how somebody's going to respond to dialogue, then that increases the tension in the story, and the reader is just waiting to find out, well, what is this person going to say? How are they going to respond to this? So the three reasons then that having authentic dialogue matters is because it helps you distinguish between characters, it helps you to build a believable world, and it helps you to increase that emotional impact or tension in the story. But how do you do this, right? How do you create more authentic dialogue? Well, the first way is something that you already do. You listen to people speak all the time. So I want you to pay more attention, though, to real conversations. How are people saying things? When you go somewhere, listen to how people speak, whether it's an older person, a young person, a male, a female, somebody from a different part of the country. When you're traveling, are they saying something the same way that you would say it? So pay attention to that, write that down, because again, that's going to make it feel more authentic, like you're really wherever that person is from, they're sounding like they're from that place. So pay attention to real conversations, and that will give you a big insight. And you might actually discover, like, wow, I didn't realize, here's a pattern on what young people are saying these days about certain things. So write those things down. The second thing is to notice the subtext. So people rarely say what they really mean. So a lot of times you have to read between the lines what people are actually saying. They might be saying one thing, but the way they're saying it, the tone of the way the person is saying it might indicate that they don't believe that they believe actually the opposite, right? So they might and say, are you okay? They might say yes, but because of the facial expression, because of the way that they said it, that yes means no. So there's subtext. Also, what people don't say gives us a feeling of what they really mean. So if we go back to that previous example of the secret pregnancy between the female character and the male character, and we rewrite this a little bit to add some subtext, it would sound slightly different. Okay, so if we say John choked on his next words, you weren't going to tell me about the baby, were you? His Adam's apple slid up and down his throat as if it were an instrument searching for the right note. Jane nodded. It wouldn't have mattered. The baby won't need a father who isn't going to be around. Okay, what is she saying? First of all, notice that she nodded. She said, when he said, you weren't going to tell me, she nodded, meaning that she was going to tell him, or she wanted to tell him, right? But then what she says is completely different from the nod. So it's opposite. So she's contradicting herself. And what is she really saying with the subtext is that she isn't going to want someone who isn't going to be around for her, right? She's using the baby, but she really means her. So again, subtext is really cool because it does sound more realistic than direct dialogue from people say exactly what they mean, because a lot of times people don't say exactly what they mean. So it makes it sound more believable a lot of times. So if you can think of creative ways to add subtext to your dialogue, do it, because it will definitely increase the believability of your story and your character's dialogue. The third thing is to use body language. Okay, so a lot of times we say a lot more with our body than we do when we're actually speaking. So our facial expressions, our gestures, the way we hold our body. If I have my shoulders like this, but I'm trying to be really happy, I'm probably not going to be believable because my body language is kind of looking down and depressed, but my language is more upbeat. And it's not matching. Okay, so a lot of times we want to make sure that we are matching what the person is saying with their body language, with the gestures and all of that, because we communicate a lot more with body language, facial expressions than we do sometimes with verbal. Okay, are there things you should avoid when you're writing dialogue? A couple things. You want to avoid probably too formal of a language. This is why that original example of the husband and wife didn't work too well. That dialogue didn't work, was because they were being too formal with each other, kind of. They were being too polite with each other. So that's not usually the way we are. We don't speak that way. We call each other out, we joke, we say inappropriate things. And so we want that to make its way into our dialogue too. You might have one character who's more of a practical joker, and the way that he responds to things are always joking. So that might be that character. It brings out that character's personality. So think of things like that. So avoid using overly formal or perfect grammar for all the characters. There might be a character who speaks perfectly, and that's fine for that character. But otherwise, keep your dialogue a little bit more informal. And the other thing to avoid is the on the nose dialogue, meaning they say exactly what they feel all the time, or they're saying things that kind of are just to inform the reader. Something that the other characters might already know, and there's no need to say it. So let's say we have dialogue between two siblings, and one says, "When you bought mom the car and she gave it to me, you were angry." Okay, well, no kidding. That's probably something that happened in the past, and that character already knows that, right? So it's really just to inform the reader of something, and it's not a good way to do it, because your one character is telling the other character something they already know. When you want to inform a reader about something, you can toss things in a little at a time, or do it in narrative, so that you're not saying something that other characters already know. So this would be the opposite of subtext, right? It's exactly on the nose. It's not something that people usually do. The only time that this would be appropriate and work well is if you have a character who again has some kind of idiosyncrasy. Maybe they're autistic or something. And I actually did read a story once that was really good. The character was autistic and didn't have mildly autistic, but didn't have any filters. And so she couldn't really read social cues, and her dialogue was always a little off. But this was part of her charm. It was the fact that she didn't know when she was saying something that was inappropriate. She didn't know when somebody said something that they don't mean exactly what they were saying. So she would respond to it as if they were saying exactly as if they meant exactly what they were saying, which made it again kind of adorable for this character. So unless you have this situation, you don't want to use that exact on the nose dialogue. Okay, so hopefully this helps you to understand dialogue a little bit better, to understand why it matters, how to improve it a little bit, and a few things not to do so that it sounds more realistic. So I hope this has helped. If it has, please hit that like button. Also hit the subscribe button so that you will be notified next week when I do record another video, and share it with your friends. I'll be back next week. See you then.